Hello and welcome. It's Tuesday, July 8th. I'm Brian Abel, and this is CNN Headline Express. Let's get started. The death toll rising, and several more people are still missing in the catastrophic Texas floods. We are learning more about the victims and some incredible stories of survival. And today, Sean Diddy Combs will be back in front of a judge to determine when he'll face sentencing.
You want a break or you got it? Hey, kitties.
And 2 children saved from a hot car at a mall in Georgia. We begin with the catastrophic flooding in Texas and a death toll that has now surpassed 100 people. Dozens are still missing as search and rescue efforts carry on for the 5th day. Among those unaccounted for, the 10 campers and their counselor from Camp Mystic. But as the hours and the days pass, the hope of finding survivors fades. And there are now lingering questions about whether more lives could have been spared. 21-year-old Joyce Catherine Baden is also among the victims. Her body was discovered Monday after days of searching. Her dad spoke with CNN's Ed Lavandera over the weekend when he was still clinging to hope that Joyce Catherine was still alive. Baden says his daughter was staying with friends at a cabin when the flooding hit Hunt, Texas, early Friday morning. We're also learning of a 19-year-old camp counselor who tragically lost her life in the flooding. Chloe Childress had just graduated high school and was spending the summer mentoring the girls at Camp Mystic. And the parents of twin girls have confirmed their daughters were killed in the flooding. Hannah and Rebecca Lawrence were just 8 years old. In a statement, their dad said, quote, "Hannah and Rebecca brought so much joy to us, to their big sister Harper, and to so many others." But for all of the death, all of the victims, there's also incredible stories of survival, including Christian Fell. He woke up to loud thunder in Hunt, Texas, early Friday morning and found half of his home had been swept away by the floodwaters. He told our Lee Waldman there were no alerts or warnings. Listen.
Let's talk about those warnings. I know that you said you woke up because you heard some sounds. Did you get an alert?
No.
Nothing telling you that the floods were coming?
No, I went to sleep at around 1 a.m. and I only woke up like 2 hours later, and I didn't have any alerts until the water was already like inside the house.
And so you're here, you wake up, you see everything. What do you do then?
That's when I call my parents. I call my mom and my dad, and they tell me to try and get in my truck and then to drive up to my aunt's house. That's where the dining table was right here and my keys were on it. So I come in, I grab my keys, and then I start walking. I walk through here, through the little kitchenette into the kitchen, where that hole in the wall is right there. That's where the door was, and my car was parked on the other side of it. I didn't realize it, but at the outside, the water level was higher than inside the house. So when I opened the door, and I couldn't see it either. I couldn't see the water outside because of how dark it was. When I opened the door, all this water started flooding back in, and I couldn't walk outside because it was like so powerful. And I couldn't close the door, so I started coming back through here, and by that time there was furniture floating. I was having to climb over furniture to get through these 2 doorways.
And CNN's Lee Waldman joins us now from Kerrville, Texas. And Lee, quite the interview there, some harrowing moments for him, but we did also hear you have this line of questioning because there's been intensifying scrutiny over why the camps weren't evacuated and that scrutiny about the emergency notifications. What are you learning on those fronts?
Brian, that's a good question, and it's one we asked when we were with Christian in his home. I asked him, Christian, did you get any kind of previous alert telling you that these floodwaters were coming? And he said no. He didn't hear anything from an alert system until the water was already in his home and it was rising, before he had to swim out of a broken window and cling to an electric meter for 3 hours waiting for rescue. And here in Kerrville, where we are now, the mayor also got no notification about these floodwaters. It was an issue for people in this community. Now, we do know the National Weather Service sent out alerts on Friday morning as that floodwater was coming, one around 1 o'clock in the morning, one around 3:30, and another around 4 a.m. Now, FEMA has said there's a variety of reasons why people might not have reached these alerts or gotten these alerts. It could be due to having the alerts turned off on their phones or their phones put on airplane mode, but it also could be a cell phone signal issue. We've run into issues with cell phone service here in this area, in the more rural parts of this county. So it could be a persistent issue for many people here. And I'm glad you brought up about the evacuations, Brian, because we've asked officials that for several days. We're finally getting those answers now. The city manager here in Kerrville talking about the fact that trying to evacuate this area with the rolling hill terrain of the Texas Hill Country, it's a difficult process. And they also didn't want cars on the road while those waters were rising. Now, Senator Ted Cruz has said, looking back now, evacuation would have been a smarter move.
And Lee, I know that you've lived, worked in Texas. I know that Texas is in your heart as well. How is this community coming together?
You know, I've worked in San Antonio, just near the Texas Hill Country for 3 years. I have friends from college who live here in Kerrville where we are right now, and I've been checking in with them. One of my dear friends, she said she hadn't heard from loved ones for days, finally heard from them yesterday, and one of her loved ones was actually rescued high up in a tree. They're thankful to be alive. Their homes were washed away, but they're just happy to be back together. And I asked her, how do you cope whenever you can't hear from loved ones, when you don't know if they're alive? And she said, all we can do is donate our supplies, donate our time, try and give back. And that's what we're seeing so many people across the Texas Hill Country do. You know, I'm partial because I'm a Texan myself, but I think the people of Texas, when we see tragedy like this, we rally around one another, Brian.
CNN's Lee Waldman continuing her great coverage in Kerrville, Texas. Lee, thank you. And back to our continuing coverage of the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Today, Combs is expected in court remotely, where a judge will determine when Combs will be sentenced. Combs' attorneys say Combs is willing to waive his rights to a pretrial investigation in order to get an expedited sentencing date, something much sooner than the judge's proposed October date. But the question still remains, how much prison time could Combs get? CNN legal analyst Joey Jackson breaks all of this down for us.
You have to embrace the elephant in the room. You can't run away from it. Everyone saw over and over and over again the tape with respect to Cassie Ventura and the vicious beating as to her. So what you want to argue with what they did. Yes, he was guilty of that, but he's not guilty of RICO, not guilty of sex trafficking. With regard to sentencing, it's very interesting. In federal court, you have these sentencing guidelines, and what they consider is the offense level. What was the person convicted of, and what is their history? And then you calculate it to determine what that calculation looks like. There's something called relevant conduct. And what the judge can consider, even though you were not convicted of it, is prior conduct that was engaged in by a defendant. And I think in this case, prosecutors certainly want that consideration being given when the sentence is meted out. Hence the disparity between the defense saying, hey, he's eligible for 2 years, and the prosecution saying it should be more like 5.
Now, last week, Combs was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking charges, but he was found guilty of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Both charges carry a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. Now to a major update involving convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The Trump-led Justice Department finding no evidence of a client list or that he was murdered in jail. This has been the source of a major conspiracy theory, with high-ranking Trump administration officials, including the president himself, promising to release more files on the disgraced financier. Attorney General Pam Bondi now under fire for claiming in an interview on Fox earlier this year that a client list was, quote, sitting on her desk.
So what happened to the Epstein client list that the Attorney General said she had on her desk?
Well, I think if you go back and look at what the Attorney General said in that interview, which was on your network, on Fox News.
Got the quote.
Go ahead.
John Roberts said, DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen? And she said, it's sitting on my desk right now to review.
Yes, she was saying the entirety of all of the paperwork, all of the paper in relation to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. That's what the Attorney General was referring to, and I'll let her speak for that.
Bondi had previously promised more evidence would be coming. In today's Health Express, the CDC has ended its emergency response to H5N1 bird flu. The agency cited a drop in cases, adding no human infections have been reported since February. The emergency response was declared April 4th, 2024, to allow for additional support like increased staffing. A Health and Human Services spokesperson says the CDC will continue to monitor the virus and scale up resources as needed. Since 2022, H5N1 has affected nearly 175 million birds and dozens of other species in the U.S. A total of 70 human cases have been reported, with one death. Several major medical organizations have filed a lawsuit against the Department of Health and Human Services and its Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They're accusing them of limiting who can get COVID-19 vaccines and undermining overall vaccine confidence. In May, Kennedy announced the COVID-19 vaccine would no longer be recommended for pregnant women and healthy children on the CDC's immunization schedule. And to Money Express, the world's richest man, Elon Musk, who wants to start a new political party. But Tesla investors aren't thrilled about that news. Maribel Aber has more from New York.
Hi, Brian. Shares of Tesla were battered yesterday after Elon Musk said he was starting a new political party. So one Wall Street analyst said investors are tiring of Musk's move into politics at a crucial point for Tesla. The company reported a 14% year-on-year decline in car deliveries last quarter and faces rising competition, especially in China. Now, yesterday, Tesla shares dropped nearly 7%. That knocked off more than $68 billion in the company's market value. Monthly payments on new auto loans keep soaring. More than 19% of new vehicle buyers last quarter took on loans with a monthly payment of $1,000 or more. That's an all-time high, up from 17.8% a year ago, according to Edmunds.com. The average monthly payment was $756, up 16 from a year ago, and the percentage of new auto buyers taking out loans for 7 years or longer soared to a record high of 22.4% last quarter. Hey, after nearly 20 years, after that, flyers will no longer need to take their shoes off at airport security lines. Media reports say the TSA is phasing out the shoes off requirement at airports around the country. And at some airports, the requirement has already been dropped. Travel newsletter Gate Access was the first to report the move. The TSA has not officially announced a change in policy just yet. Flyers have been required to remove shoes since 2006. That was about 5 years after a terrorist tried to detonate explosives packed in a shoe. Brian, that was one of the benefits, though, of TSA PreCheck, worth that $80. But have you ever forgotten to wear socks? Because I've worn socks after 2006.
All right, we are just getting started here on CNN Headline Express. Despite tomorrow's trade deal deadline being pushed back, why some top U.S. trading partners are now facing new tariffs. And California's governor fueling new speculation that he is going to run for president in 2028. The key early primary state, Gavin Newsom, is spending 2 days in a little later. And new developments in the search for a survivalist father who is accused of murdering his 3 young daughters before going on the run last month, where he may have just been spotted. That's coming up. Welcome back. In Los Angeles, dozens of armed federal officers were deployed to an area park on Monday, apparently to protect immigration officers carrying out a raid. Mayor Karen Bass was among those in the crowd who confronted the agents, calling the whole event, quote, outrageous and an attempt to spread fear. CNN's Veronica Miracle has the story.
Federal law enforcement officials swarmed MacArthur Park, an area not far from downtown Los Angeles. Activists here say they drove them out. Mayor Karen Bass of Los Angeles also showed up with an impassioned plea. Here's what she had to say to them. Mayor Bass says those officers were lining this area as children were playing.
Frankly, it is outrageous and un-American that we have federal armed vehicles in our parks when nothing is going on in the parks. There was no protest There was no disorder that required that.
Activists were banging on those ICE cars and eventually drove them out. It's not clear exactly if anyone was detained when those ICE agents were here. We did reach out to Immigration Customs Enforcement officials. They said that they do not comment on ongoing operations.
To Maryland now, where a man recently returned to the U.S. is facing deportation once again. A rally was held on Monday outside the courthouse in Greenbelt, Maryland for Kilmar Garcia. He's the man who was wrongfully sent to El Salvador back in March and is currently in custody in Tennessee. But supporters are crying foul over the Trump administration's plan to deport him before he goes to trial.
To this administration, we simply ask, bring Kilmar home, stop the terror through ICE and the unlawful, unconstitutional actions that have been taking place, because this is America. We have rules, we have process, and every single day this administration continues to put an assault on all the things that we know normal. Shame, shame, shame.
Garcia is facing human smuggling charges and is currently in pre-trial detention, but could be turned over to the Department of Homeland Security as soon as next week. And now for an update on that deadly fireworks warehouse explosion in California. This here was the scene last week. Look at that. When a barrage of fireworks detonated, causing a massive blaze at a facility in Esparto, that's north of Sacramento. 7 bodies were recovered near the scene. Yolo County officials now say that DNA testing is underway to identify the remains, as anxious families camp out demanding answers. Meanwhile, the local fire chief says his teams are still working to mitigate potential problems because of all the leftover unexploded fireworks. A court in Australia has released footage shown to the jury who convicted Erin Patterson of serving poisonous mushrooms to her in-laws at a lunch in 2023. 3 people did die. In one of the videos released by the court, we see Erin Patterson enter a convenience store. She reportedly stopped there to use the restroom after she said she experienced symptoms similar to her victims. But in the clip, she only briefly enters and exits the store, sandwich in hand. And then there's this video. Here we see a hospital worker using her phone to videotape some of the evidence gathered from the crime scene. It appears to be the leftovers from that deadly lunch. Police confiscated the mushrooms and beef Wellington from a trash bin outside Patterson's home. The 50-year-old mother of 2 will be sentenced at a later date. She faces up to life in prison. Let's go to Washington now, where President Trump has pushed back tomorrow's deadline on reciprocal tariffs until August 1st. At the same time, he also slapped a new 25% import tax on some top U.S. trading partners. Anna Stewart joins me live from London. And so, Anna, starting with tomorrow's tariff deadline, why the delay?
Yes, tomorrow's deadline is no longer a deadline, not for the first time. There is a reprieve, which means countries have until the 1st of August now to try and reach a trade deal with the United States. Now, let's just sort of recap where we're at, because the pause has been for 90 days so far. There is one trade deal with the UK. There is a trade deal in principle with Vietnam, and there's something of a trade truce with China. I'm not sure it's broad enough for us to be able to call it a deal. So there are plenty more deals to be done if tariffs are ultimately to be avoided. Now, I have to say, there's not much market reaction. The deadlines have shifted so many times at this stage, Brian. And actually, the president has just posted on Truth Social to say, as per all the letters that he's been sending, tariffs will start being paid on August the 1st, 2025. There has been no change to this date, and there will be no change. In other words, all money will be due and payable starting August the 1st. No extensions will be granted. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I think the president is probably getting concerned that no one's taking the deadlines very seriously at this stage because they have been so fluid. Many countries will be trying and hoping to get a deal done. The question is, will this extra time really be able to do that? So many countries have responded today, the ones that have been hit with tariffs like South Africa, saying we have, a protocol, we have been trying to do a deal. There are clearly some sticking points. Japan has been unable to move on things like rice and cars. they've all been trying. So the question is whether they can actually get a deal in the next few weeks.
And Anna, South Korea and Japan, as you mentioned, were some of the first to face new tariffs. Who else is still waiting for their letter?
Yes, well, what's been so interesting, actually, isn't necessarily who has received a letter, but who hasn't yet received a letter. So two key trading partners that are ones to watch. One is India, which has been one of the ones that we thought would get a trade deal from fairly early on in negotiations. And the other one is the EU, which we know has been struggling to reach a deal. Talks have been very active. There was a meeting in DC with the EU Trade Commissioner last week. The EU Commission President spoke to President Trump over the weekend. Still nothing has been agreed, not even in principle at this stage. But we did hear from the EU Trade Commissioner, Maros Sefcovic. This is what he had to say.
We continue to engage closely with our US counterparts on the tariffs placed on European goods. I want to assure you that we are working flat out to secure a fair and mutually beneficial negotiated solutions. But we need to be prepared for all outcomes and be ready to rebalance if necessary.
So the EU is working, as they say, flat out. But of course, you've got to remember there are 27 member states. That's a particularly tricky trade deal to reach. And actually, we've just heard from the German finance minister who said if we don't reach a fair trade deal with the US, the EU is ready to take countermeasures. They already have countermeasures. Some of them agreed already, some of them penciled in. And some members will be keen to use those if the deal isn't what they want.
All right. CNN's Anna Stewart from London, thank you so much for your insight. Let's go across the country now. In Washington state, Travis Decker, the man wanted in connection with the deaths of his 3 daughters, may have been spotted over the weekend. Federal authorities receiving a tip, and they're now following up on the new lead. Joey Martin from our affiliate KIVI has more.
The law enforcement's been calm, cool. They've told us everything that I feel like we needed to see, and they're down here checking us again today.
Nick Urey lives in Hanson full-time, but his family has a cabin in the rural Sawtooth area where the potential Decker sighting took place. Urey says law enforcement approached him and his family Sunday afternoon.
Tell us that they were going to be there last night, today, maybe have helicopters, maybe, checking out the mountain, checking all the cabins, talking to landowners, things like that. They were very nice. It was very comfortable. They were in and out real quick.
While not fully up to speed on the Decker case, Urey knows what he is accused of in Washington state, but says he still feels safe here in Idaho.
Do you feel safe? Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't think you would go where people would go. I don't know. I think you'd keep walking.
Due to the rugged terrain, investigators brought in a helicopter to help with the search, as well as dirt bikes and ATVs, and encourage everyone in the area to remain vigilant until this search is complete, and do not pick up any hitchhikers.
Our thanks to Joey Martin for that report. In Texas, a 27-year-old man has been shot and killed after a shootout at a Border Patrol facility. 2 officers and a Border Patrol employee were hurt during the shooting, according to Homeland Security, with all 3 going to the hospital. McAllen's police chief says dozens of rounds were fired by the suspect.
Border Patrol agents returned fire and subsequently neutralized, that is, killed the person that had opened fire upon that building. I cannot tell you how many rounds were fired from the suspect, specifically that is, but there were many dozens of rounds fired by the suspect towards the building and towards agents in that building.
Police say the gunman was connected to a Michigan address and a car with Michigan tags. The FBI is looking into the shooting.
You want a break or you got it? Hey, kitties.
And this scene is in Georgia. Newly released body cam footage shows the moments police officers rescue 2 children they say were trapped inside a hot car outside a suburban Atlanta mall. This happened back in June when a woman called 911 to report what she saw. Officers say the kids were left inside the car for more than 40 minutes, while the temperature inside climbed to 117 degrees. About half an hour after that rescue, officers arrested their father and charged him with 2 counts of second-degree cruelty to children. The 1- and 2-year-olds were taken to a hospital for evaluation. To national politics now, and more speculation that California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom could make a run for the White House in 2028. Newsom kicks off a 2-day trip through the key primary states of South Carolina today. He's expected to visit 8 GOP-leaning rural counties. Ahead on CNN Headline Express, the Mexican Consulate is lending a hand after the catastrophic flooding in Texas. We're on the ground there coming up. And it's been 6 months since the devastating Eaton and Palisades wildfires ravaged Southern California. What some survivors are now saying.
Maybe it's a pelican, and then sure enough, we get there and there's a deer out there swimming.
You heard it right. It's an ocean rescue you have to see to believe in Florida. The moment a deer was saved from the choppy ocean waters. That's ahead.